Okay, chapter 6, valuing the environment. Okay, before we dive in, let's have a quick conversation on what is the price, or sorry, what is the difference between price and value. Okay. Now, these two words are often used interchangeably in society, in everyday conversation. Okay, but I think before we move on, we should be very clear on what these words actually mean. Right? So price is an objective measure used in market transaction. Right? For example, right, you go to Starbucks, you buy a cup of coffee for $5. Okay, that is the price, right? That you and Starbucks agree to trade. Right? However, that is not the value of the coffee. Right? How do I know? Well, because if you are willing to spend $5 for that cup of coffee, then clearly you value that cup of coffee more than $5. That's why you're willing to give up the $5 for that cup of coffee. Vice versa, Starbucks values that cup of coffee less than $5. That's why Starbucks is willing to give up the cup of coffee in exchange for $5. Right? So value then, right, is a subjective or even abstract measure that varies depending on the individual preference or and need. Right? If you live in a urban city, then you probably don't value water all that much, right? But until a hurricane comes along, or you find yourself in the middle of a desert, then all of a sudden, right, you value you value water much more. Okay, so value changes depending on need, right? And also value is a very personal preference as well, right? You can find individuals living in the same household that does not value the same things, right? The same, right? They might have very different opinion on the same resources. And so what we're doing in this chapter really is not valuing the environment but pricing the environment, right? We all agree that there is value to the environment. Right? Remember that example I gave in the Ecuador rainforest. Right? The problem is that the rainforest didn't have value. It sure did. Right? This is why we're talking about it. That's why you guys are here. You're interested in environmental issues. However, that value of the environment or the rainforest, right, was not priced accordingly. Right? So there was a market failure. Right? We ended up destroying something that is valuable. Okay? So the goal of environmental economics is to try to fix these market failures, and the way that we're going to do that is to put a price on these environmental resources. Okay, all right. So the two basic questions in environmental economics are: what is the right balance between environmental protection and degradation? And how do we induce economic agents to use the environment in a fashion that we have determined is socially desirable? Okay. Well, what we mean by economic agents are things like taxes, subsidies, or regulations, where we simply ban people or we fine people, right, for doing certain things. And the whole goal is to change the behavior, right, so we can have the desirable outcome. Okay. But before we even get to what type of policies we should use, right, we need to think about what do we want as a society? What is desired, right, in our society, right? Should we, how much environmental degradation should we accept? Okay? And that is a ethical and moral question, right? And that depends on your individual beliefs, and people have different beliefs and society have different beliefs, right, regarding the environment. Okay, and just for thought, I'd like to share the religion Jainism with you. By the way, I am not an expert, so apologies for if I get any of the details wrong. This is just a very rough research on my part. Right? I've been but I just want to point out, right, in Jainism, right, it's a very minimalist way of looking at the world. Like, you should live in a way that minimizes the use of the world's resource, and more importantly, every living thing has a soul, and every soul is considered equal value. Okay, and I suggest Google the Digimon Bara monk. Sorry for the pronunciation, but if this is a particular sect of Jainism, and their living or their lifestyle, right? It has almost no ownership of any material. So they own almost nothing. They have almost no clothing, right? And they live an extremely minimalist life, right? And in order, because in the reason is because to preserve, right? they don't want to degrade the environment in any way, shape, or form. Now I understand, right? The fact that you are here at this university, you do not completely agree with this philosophy, right? Because you do own things, right? You have stuff, right? And you are using resources of the world. Okay. All right. Now, all right. But in order to determine what is best, what is good, we need an ethical foundation. Okay, so this is the ethical foundation of economics. Okay, now you do not have to accept this ethical foundation to utilize the tools in economics. Let me just make that clear. However, I do believe that this ethical foundation is broad enough to cover pretty much every single individual in the world. Okay, and so just so I ask, right? Have an open mind and see if your individual ethical view fits this. Right? So this is utilitarianism, okay? And basically, right, is what determines good or what determines what is right is that it brings people happiness. Right? So, for example, why should we clean up the environment? Why should we protect the environment? Right? It is because people like it. It brings people happiness to see clean environments. Right? It brings people happiness to know that the rainforest exists. Therefore, that's what gives the value, and that's what we should. And it is good that we keep polar bears alive. Right? And so, for those of you who remember from other econ classes, like you might remember the utility function, right? And economists is always trying to maximize that utility function. Yeah, we do not make a judgment on what makes people happy, right? If it makes you happy, if it makes you happy, right, to have a lot of money, right, that could be optimal. If it makes you happy that the world is just simply a greener place, that's okay too, right? That all these things have value, okay? Or I should say, that's what gives things value, is individuals, is individuals' happiness. Okay. All right. Now, how do we determine the value of environmental quality? Okay. So let's start with this question: how much is the ecosystem of the world worth? Okay, to put it in context, in 2015 or 2014, the global GDP was $75.59 trillion. Okay, so a group of scientists, right, in 2014, did the study or used evaluation techniques to try to value the ecosystem. Okay, and this is the annual value. Okay, so this is not the total value. This is just every year, right? The ecosystem of the world produces this much goods and services, right? In terms of monetary value. Okay, and the value they got was $124 trillion. Okay, right now, how can the value of the ecosystem be greater than the global GDP? Right? And what is this number? Is it useful? Like what can we use this number for? Right? What does this number actually mean? Okay, and is it meaningful, right, to individuals, or is it meaningful to society or to governments? Okay. Another food for thought, 1997, the same group of scientists, right, they did the same exercise, and their estimate at the time was $33 trillion. Right, so what changed in 17 years? Right? Has the ecosystem become that much more productive in the span of 17 years? Did we discover more natural resources, or that much more natural resources in 17 years? I don't think so. Right? And so is this technique, right? Is this valuation process scientific? Right? Or even a better question is there even a correct answer to all